the next, and then it started again, turnips and barley and prunes. There was no fat. Potatoes were roasted in a little water so that they stuck to the pan. Bread got into a worse and worse state.
German bread was made with grass, tree bark, turnips, or even a flour made from dried blood. Coffee was made from walnut shells, tea from raspberry or nettle leaves. There were 7,000 food substitutes in German shops.
The food situation got worse and worse. We were always very, very hungry, especially the people who didn't get anything else. And I remember very well my mother was so thin that I, a small child, could easily lift her up.
A great nation was being ground down to grey and soul-destroying poverty. The German soldier on the Western Front was being struck at through the sufferings of his wife and children. In a forlorn attempt to break the ring of warships that was starving her industries, Germany designed and built the first submarine merchant ship in the world, the unarmed Deutschland. Before America's entry into the war, the Deutschland made 2 successful voyages to American ports. Her captain and crew were fated for the novelty and daring of their enterprise. Though Deutschland could carry limited quantities of vital chemicals or metals, but she and her sister ships could not solve the problem of the blockade. Only ruthless counter-blockade of Britain could do that. The German government announced to the world,
"From the 1st of February 1917, sea traffic will be stopped with every available weapon and without further notice in the following blockade zones: around Great Britain, France, Italy, and the Eastern Mediterranean."
Henceforth, any ship, even neutrals, in these waters would be sunk at sight by German submarines. The vessel that in 1914 had been thought too frail to venture far from German coasts had now become Germany's greatest hope of victory. The great battle fleets of Britain and Germany were impotent onlookers in this unforeseen struggle at sea. There were no stately deployments into line ahead, no thundering broadsides, no victory bells in this continuous, pitiless war of starvation. 2 great nations had each other by the throat with a grip that tightened in convulsive desperation, and one must die. January 1917, 150,000 tons of British shipping lost. February, 300,000 tons. March, 350,000 tons. April, nearly 550,000 tons. Then, slowly, month by month, the U-boat was mastered. Convoys, counterattacks by convoy escorts and by merchant ships now armed with guns, new hydrophone listening gear, depth charges, each step made the British counterattack more deadly. Aircraft searched the seas ready to bomb and machine gun. Even apparently helpless victims were used to tempt U-boats to destruction. These were the famous Q ships. Lloyd George wrote,
"It was Britain's grandest struggle at sea, in its magnitude, in its intensity, in the issues that depended upon it. The battle was fought in every ocean and on every trade route. Never were the skill, the daring, and the endurance of British sailors put to so stern a test."
The sea war went on. The submarines went still further afield for gain, refilling their tanks with captured oil and their galleys with captured eatables. British survival still depended on the courage of her merchant seamen.
I have heard of one man who has been in no less than 7 vessels that have been torpedoed. A large number of men last winter experienced days of agony and suffering in open boats. Many of them have had to have their limbs amputated.
Although the British had averted outright starvation, food became scarcer and scarcer. Compulsory rationing was hateful to British traditions. Instead, the government appealed to the nation to ration itself according to a published weekly scale.
4 pounds of bread or 3 pounds of flour, 2.5 pounds of meat, 3/4 of a pound of sugar.
I know that in government circles deep anxiety prevails. Famine is feared. Stocks of wheat are down to 9 weeks' supply.
On the 25th of February 1918, compulsory rationing was at last introduced in London and the home counties. In April, it was extended to the whole of Great Britain.
Meat, approximately 2 pounds a week. Sugar and fats, half a pound each a week.
Rationing did not put an end to shortages.
I remember going into a shop after not having milk for several days, and they said, if you can produce a baby, you can have some milk. That was out. I went into a butcher's shop to get some meat because we were just beginning to be rationed. And I said, that looks like cat. He said, it is.
The fight against food shortages fell upon a nation short of fertilizers, animal feeding stuffs, and above all, labor. In 1917, the Women's Farm Labour Force, over 230,000 of them by 1918, put on their uniforms, and the fight for higher food production was carried into the fields by a new army, the Women's Land Army. The Lilac Sunbonnet Brigade, as they were called, overcame the skepticism with which they were greeted by the farmers and formed a vital replacement to farm workers, drafted by the inexorable demands of war to the front. Timber, a vital commodity in a war which demanded more and more for pit props, for ammunition boxes, for huts and billets, for duckboards, for trench works, and for building, called for more and more labor. Again, women came to help and invaded a man's world with energy and with unexpected skill. Nations came to accept the breaking down of traditions and firm beliefs, intrusions upon old ways, personal liberties. Motor vehicles, when requisitioned for government purposes,